pattern that you win when you gamble for a while, but lose when you gamble for too long, has long been documented in the data reports of countless casinos and can be seen in the silent gazes of innumerable gamblers. Statisticians do not need to inspect the suit of every card. By simply reviewing the daily gains and losses, they can spot the direction of absolute momentum. Chips flow like a tide from the pockets of casual players to the cash vaults of the house. There may be occasional surges, but the sea's flow never truly reverses. If we peel away the layers, we can break down the entire process into 4 stages: temptation, consolidation, loss of control, and collapse. While these names may sound simple, they encompass perspectives from probability theory, behavioral economics, group psychology, neurobiology, and sociology. Each discipline can independently explain this trap, but it is only when all perspectives overlap that we truly see the sophistication of casino design and the irredeemable gambler's dilemma. The sure win on the first time at the gambling table is not a mystery, but rather a conspiracy between probability and human nature. Novice gamblers typically display characteristics such as small bets, minimal emotional fluctuations, and a low threshold for quitting. Small stakes mean that the absolute expected loss in a probability model is negligible. Assuming the house advantage is 2% to 5%, a $100 bet results in an average loss of only 2 to 5 USD. Meanwhile, loss aversion in psychology causes people to perceive a $100 win as good news, and to minimize or attribute the $5 loss to bad luck. At the same time, the casino's reward structure employs variable ratio reinforcement, giving above-average returns at random intervals. This type of reinforcement has been repeatedly proven in experiments to maximize dopamine secretion, triggering the try-again impulse. In other words, when the chips are small and the excitement is fresh, the chances of winning are not actually improved. Instead, the combination of low loss and high excitement creates the illusion of a sure win. When this illusion spreads through social transmission and gets packaged as beginner's luck, the first phase of temptation is completed. The second stage, consolidation, arises from the gambler's illusion of control. The most typical behavior is doubling down, mimicking hot streaks, attempting to read the table, or using systems, such as the martingale. At this point, players begin tracking the long chain of red and black on the trend chart. Meanwhile, their minds catch imaginary order amidst massive noise. The rare consecutive wins and the frequent alternations are treated as market signals, stimulating gamblers to generate reasoning like, "It's due," or "A reversal is coming," almost like a miniature version of stock market technical analysis. However, mathematical evidence repeatedly shows that in independent events with binomial distribution, the previous outcome has no effect on the next. The so-called martingale system is simply magnifying short-term fluctuations and trading time for space, with an expected return always on the negative side. Once the system enters a losing streak, bets grow exponentially, inevitably reaching either the gambler's financial limit or the casino's betting cap. The danger of consolidation does not lie in a single large loss, but in the alternating peaks of gains and troughs of losses, which trap the decision-making system in an illusion of predictability. Behavioral economics calls this phenomenon the illusion of control. Humans tend to overestimate their ability to control random processes. When the bet is small and the loss doesn't reach the pain threshold, but repeated wins accumulate, the concept of skill starts to take root, eventually giving birth to the third phase, loss of control. The loss of control phase begins when the script is disrupted. A martingale breakdown, a trend reversal, or a hot streak coming to an end will trigger a significant loss in a short time. Compared to the small profits accumulated previously, the gambler suddenly sees their net worth shift into the negative, causing an explosive rise in stress hormones. At this moment, dopamine secretion halts, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and cortisol, putting the body into fight-or-flight mode. The rational analytical system is overwhelmed by emotions, inhibiting the prefrontal cortex and reducing long-term planning and risk evaluation abilities, while impulsivity and aggression rise. Group psychology's compensatory conformity also operates in tandem. If someone at the table successfully cuts their losses and exits, the loser finds it even harder to leave, as admitting failure means accepting their stupidity, a highly undesirable label within the self-esteem system. The result is often a doubling down of bets, leveraging assets, and borrowing money. Early on, the borrowing behavior often carries self-reassurance, such as, "This is the last bet," or "I'll stop once I win back the losses," which is a self-sabotaging commitment bias in gambling models. With each additional wager, the perception of sunk costs deepens, raising the threshold for quitting and forming the deeper you go, the harder it is to escape spiral. The collapse stage is not just about running out of money, but about the crumbling of both social and mental capital. After the financing chain breaks, debt interest snowballs, with legal loans quickly replaced by high-interest ones. Interpersonal relationships face a trust crisis, and the support network of family and friends no longer provides relief. Emotional dysregulation extends into the physiological realm, with insomnia, anxiety, and physical pain taking turns. With the dopamine threshold so high, other positive feedback in life loses its appeal. Work promotions, close relationships, and outdoor activities fail to provide enough stimulation, making the gambling table the only environment that can temporarily fill the void. Even when funds are nearly depleted, the addiction memories remain active, and as soon as external conditions loosen, such as a bonus, salary, or even a refund of principal, the probability of relapse surges. At this point, the gambler has gradually lost normal occupational functions, turning to asymmetric risk routes to make a living, such as spotting, scoring, investment schemes, or gray market part-time jobs. Sociology calls this professional degradation, which is the brutal truth of countless individuals becoming professional gamblers. Winning is not a career. It's just a ticket to keep betting. It's only when one has no more to lose that the game is truly over. Comparing the four-stage curve, it is clear that the game between the casino and the gambler is highly asymmetric. The casino has an explicit probabilistic advantage, sufficient liquidity, cold algorithms, integrated marketing, and delayed credit, and does not bear emotional costs. The gambler, on the other hand, enters with limited funds, emotional decision-making, sunk costs, social face, and family pressure. The former guarantees long-term profit using systematic methods, while the latter relies on personal willpower to resist the mechanism's blades, like industrial machinery versus a bamboo fishing rod. If we quantify expected value, assuming a house edge of 2%, the gambler's bet ranges from $100 to $1,600, and after 100 rounds, the expected loss approaches 2% of the total capital. When bets double geometrically, the loss far exceeds a linear scale. If we also factor in loan interest, time costs, and opportunity costs, the actual net loss is several times the visible chip amount. Probability is impartial. Only the gap between time and funds determines who gets eliminated first. The casino's bankroll is nearly infinite, while the gambler's bankroll is extremely limited, and the scale always tips in favor of the house. The trap is not only constructed by algorithms and probabilities, but also by language and culture. The popular sayings, "bet to win 7 out of 10, and 10 bets, 9 losses" coexist, seemingly contradictory, but actually complementary. The former ignites fantasy, paving the red carpet for beginners. The latter spreads fear, causing the addicted to blame themselves for not being exceptional instead of the game itself. Social media screenshots of wins, live streams of high stakes, and comeback stories on forums create the illusion that there are shortcuts. Yet these stories often ignore odds, sample size, and luck corrections, cloaking the narrative with skills, techniques, or mindset. This narrative structure forms an informational echo chamber, where input and output are both dominated by gambling discourse, and negative feedback is unable to penetrate. Cognitive science has confirmed that the human brain, when heavily addicted, exhibits selective attention and memory consolidation effects for addiction-related information. In simple terms, gamblers only absorb content that provides excuses to keep betting. From the perspective of neurobiology, dopamine and endorphins play the role of the chief conductor in the entire cycle. Initial bets trigger unexpected rewards, leading the nucleus accumbens to secrete peak dopamine, creating a surprise, craving dual rhythm. Over time, the reward threshold rises, and to reach the peak again, one must either increase the bet or extend the betting duration, thus upgrading and building tolerance simultaneously. Meanwhile, prolonged emotional fluctuations trigger excessive excitement in the amygdala, and once depression sets in, endorphin release becomes insufficient, amplifying pain and making it harder for the gambler to bear losses. To alleviate the pain, the next bet becomes a substitute for pain relief. This is the fundamental reason why gamblers bet more the more they lose, rather than quit after losing to the limit. Clinical research on addiction shows that fewer than 20 per 10,000 gamblers are able to fully abstain for over a year without relapsing, and the success rate is comparable to quitting heroin or cocaine. Cold, hard data and fiery drama constantly intertwine, ultimately converging into an old saying, "There are no winners in a gambling game." Strictly speaking, the only winner is the system. The system refers not only to the casino but also to the lending platforms, high-interest loans, margin brokers, after-sales recovery, and intelligence agents that form the ecosystem in tandem with the casino. Every bet is cut into smaller parts in the form of fees, interest, or commissions before or after it enters the table. Even if the gambler wins back a small portion, their actual purchasing power has been invisibly eroded. In other words, even when there are occasional large wins, victory is merely bait to keep betting, not a channel for wealth accumulation. Treating the gambling table as a profession is akin to treating scratch-off lottery tickets as retirement funds, distorting logic and ruining one's future. Faced with such a well-constructed trap, can one escape it completely? Sociologists offer three key concepts: boundaries, substitutes, and supervision. Boundaries refer to both physical and psychological limits. Never enter a gambling environment with funds that exceed your tolerance, and never link automatic transfers to any e-wallets. Once losses reach a predetermined threshold, exit immediately. Substitutes refer to replacing high-risk gambling with low-damage activities that trigger the same amount of dopamine, such as high-intensity sports, real-time strategy games, improvisational music, or extreme sports. These activities also trigger dopamine but do not create an insatiable pit. Supervision requires external intervention, including financial management, social feedback, psychological counseling, and mutual support groups. Data shows that self-discipline alone results in a relapse rate of over 80%. Involving family supervision or anonymous support groups can reduce this rate to 35% to 40%. And with professional psychological treatment and medication assistance, the relapse rate can fall below 20%. In short, exiting the gambling game is not a battle of willpower but an upgrade in the war between systems. The essence of the casino's labyrinth can also be broken down from a more macro perspective. The different ways in which economic systems price risk determine who can exist as a long-term player in the game, and who can only briefly appear as a consumable item. The odds provided by casinos are statistically negative expected value assets and do not offer any secondary market hedging opportunities. At least financial market options can be hedged or priced based on time value, but casino chips lack this protection. When chips lack hedging, risk is not spread like in an asset portfolio, but instead jumps directly to an individual's profit and loss statement. The reality, however, is paradoxical. Many gamblers firmly believe that the casino is truly fair, in order to counter the narrative that capital markets are rigged for the rich. This logical inversion arises from a confusion between the concepts of explicit probability and implicit rules. The casino's odds seem to avoid hidden clauses, but conceal a more deadly implicit rule: the natural conflict between continuous betting and financial limits. High-level participants in financial markets understand that financial limits are the primary constraint for all strategies, so they use position management, stop losses, insurance, and other tools to create a buffer. The casino, however, leaves this layer empty, so that gamblers hit the hard ceiling as quickly as possible, and the harvest is completed. Let's now turn our attention to family structures and intergenerational cycles. In the loss of control stage, the gambler's decision-making scope shrinks drastically. Intimate relationships and children's educational expenses are often forced to make way for their recovery budget. Family system theory holds that when family resources are overly consumed by a single risk source, the self-regulation function of the family system will become sharply imbalanced. The partner role turns into a debt negotiation partner. Parent-child communication is contaminated by negative emotions, and the unit that originally provided emotional support becomes a battlefield for blame and avoidance. Children, being at an early developmental stage, cannot accurately identify risks, often equating financial disorder in the family with a breakdown in emotional connection, leading to heightened anxiety and impulsivity in adulthood. A longitudinal study indicates that children from families where one parent has a severe gambling problem are 2.8 times more likely to encounter high-risk financial products before age 25, and 3.6 times more likely to engage in problem gambling behavior. Gambling not only devours a generation's net worth, but, through emotional poverty and inherited risk preferences, leaves broken financial concepts to the next generation, forming an invisible intergenerational tax. On the legal front, some gamblers view the law as their final safeguard, as if staying away from illegal venues will help them avoid extreme consequences. However, in cases of loss of control at legal casinos, the law merely draws the boundary of not subject to criminal prosecution, without providing any compensation for financial loss or credit collapse. Furthermore, some jurisdictions have expanded the debt collection toolbox by making gambling debts recoverable, making it even harder for gamblers to escape after losing everything. The legal system's neutrality reinforces the commercial legitimacy of casinos, but leaves individuals even more reliant on internal self-restraint. While psychological counseling can help regulate emotions, it cannot replace a systemic asset protection mechanism. Without asset protection, legal and illegal have no essential difference in the economic dimension, and the gambler still faces the same expected loss table. Comparing different cultures and religious traditions' tolerance of gambling, it is clear that the narrative of "you win when you gamble for a while, but lose when you gamble for too long" is especially popular in regions with high economic pressure and weak religious constraints. When social mobility narrows and class advancement channels become blocked, gambling becomes the fastest stage to forge a comeback story. The story needs only two elements: small cost, large return, and gambling just happens to fit these criteria. The experience of losing after prolonged gambling is often packaged as needing skills upgrade or mindset breakthrough to overcome, thus prolonging the narrative's lifespan. Information economics points out that when recipients of information are in economic distress or overloaded with cognitive load, they tend to focus significantly more on success samples than failure ones. This is the psychological soil in which casinos and peripheral marketing agencies thrive, showcasing highlight moments. However, these highlight moments and devastating losses are not a true reflection of odds, but a narrative technique. The missing failure samples are buried by the sunk cost, creating a survivor bias. Through exponential on social media, this eventually creates a macro-level illusion of abundance, making gambling seem to be full of liquidity and opportunities. In fact, this liquidity merely pauses in the snapshot of successful samples. Off-camera, failed samples are lining up for a financial chokehold. Today, "do not gamble excessively" is no longer a fatalistic statement. It is the intersection of probability, psychology, systems, and culture. After peeling away the veneer, the true question left for the world by gambling games is, how do we train both individuals and collectives to better perceive risk and establish boundary awareness in an era of high uncertainty? And how can the spirit of competition serve innovation instead of consuming? The answer cannot be a wishful breakthrough at a single point, but needs a systemic approach. Even if all the gaps are sealed, new forms of gambling will still emerge. But as long as each technological or system upgrade raises the cost of temptation, shortens the exit path, and makes intervention resources more accessible, the curve from beginner's sweet spot to addiction's deep pit will become steeper, making it harder to drag people into the abyss. Gamblers are not born losers. They are pushed into a race with a winning probability inherently skewed toward loss, due to unbalanced risk incentives. only by restoring the original sequence, formula, and human biases of this race can we truly break the structural curse behind "you win when you gamble for a while, but lose when you gamble for too long."